My name sounds so much better in French than it does in English. So, Julian, you can introduce me anytime. So I'm Elisabeth Carpenter. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Circle. And I'm coming up on my 7th Circleversary, as we call them. So I've seen my fair share of challenges in the industry, and we just had a recent one, and we're getting through that one, as we have with all the others in the past. My colleague here is Marieke Flament, as you've heard. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Great to be here. Coming to a Circle event feels a little bit like coming back home. That's actually where I got my first learning in crypto. So I'm Marieke Flament, that's said in French. I'm the CEO of the NEAR Foundation. NEAR is a layer 1 protocol evolving into a blockchain operating system. I'm sure we'll talk about that. And I got into crypto end of 2015, early 2016, actually working for Circle. Mm-hmm. So yeah,
that's right. Yeah. Here we are. All right. So we wanted to start by talking about obviously what NEAR does, what its origin story is, and how that relates to real world utility value. But before we get there, can you just share your high level view of what is a blockchain, why it matters, why anyone in the audience should care, and then how NEAR distinguishes itself from others in the context of the origin story, et cetera. There was a lot in there, but
perfect.
Yeah.
But so yeah, going back to the premises of what is a blockchain, this idea of having a shared, immutable, trusted record ledger is actually extremely powerful. And the question actually, why do we need blockchains? Well, we are in a world where actually still a lot of the information and the creation that we do doesn't belong to us, but actually belongs to others who are centralized party. And leveraging actually decentralized, trusted, immutable ledger, we can actually flip that on its head. And so it's a paradigm shift in terms of technology and what it enables to do. And I think that's why we need that. And ultimately, why and what they enable is really this idea of changing business cases and inventing new things that are otherwise not possible, such as having creators own their content, having you and each one of us actually own our data and decide where we want that data to actually be ported. I think the second part of your question was actually, what the hell is NEAR? Not like that, but something else.
I was much more polite.
So what is NEAR? Actually, funny story. So NEAR, the name comes from singularity is NEAR, because the two co-founders of NEAR actually have their background in AI. And so they first started by actually creating an AI company, and it was going to be a company that was going to be creating all the programs and all the projects in the world that were possible to create. And for that, they had a network of developers around the world. And when you want to pay your network of developers, well, you think you're going to use blockchain. And so they started wanting to use that, and then they realized it was like slow, very expensive, and actually didn't work. And so they went back to the drawing board, and they thought, okay, what if we actually create our own blockchain and our own layer 1? Mm-hmm. And so they did that by interviewing, and it's very entertaining. There is a whole suite on YouTube of whiteboard series. They interviewed literally every layer 1 there is out there, and they went and they figured out what are the bits that really work and what are actually the bits that don't work. And so NEAR started as a layer 1. We like the name NEAR because we're nearly there, never fully there, nearly there. And so the idea is having basically a blockchain that is truly usable for end users and actually also for developers. We started as a layer 1. Today we're evolving in what we call a blockchain operating system, because at the end of the day, and we'll talk about mainstream adoption, but at the end of the day, users don't care about what technology they're on. None of you care if you're on AWS or if you're on Google Cloud. What you care about is actually, is this really doing something that's transformational and that I need for myself? But I'm also curious to hear, Circle. Obviously, I've been living in the house, but the story of Circle and actually what does mainstream mean for Circle nowadays?
Yeah. So, I mean, as those of you who are here this morning would have heard, Circle was born out of the desire to ensure that money could move at the speed of the internet in a trusted, transparent, easy, convenient, inexpensive way. And it's kind of reprehensible that money doesn't travel that way. Money is inherently exclusive based on how the institutions have been set up around it. And that really just needs to change. And we believe that that we can enable that to happen with what we're doing with USDC. And the first the sort of table stakes, if you will, to use a betting term, but to use the table stakes, the required foundation to get even anywhere close to utility value is only going to happen if USDC, Eurocoin, et cetera, if any stable coins that we are backing are actually trusted. And the way you earn trust is if what is backing them is transparent and easy to see and easy to digest and always available for you to understand that your dollar that you gave us originally now sits in a bank. We give you a USDC in exchange for it. And that dollar sits in a reserve that you can look at and you can see if it's invested in a treasury bill. You can see that in a transparent way down to the QSIP number, et cetera. These are topics that Jeremy talked about in his opening session earlier. And so that's the base layer. If you don't have trust, you just might as well go home. The paper bill you have, the digital dollar you have, the bank you put your money in, as we just learned and saw, all of us had a front row seat to that last week. If you don't trust it, then basically it's game over. So in order to get to that kind of mainstream adoption and utility case, you have to have the trust. You have to establish that. And because we have plenty of utilitarian mainstream use cases today, and there's only more coming down the pike. But certain examples that we could refer to are some of the humanitarian use cases we have are the most compelling in many respects, because this is literally transformational. It's showing how USDC and a true digital dollar is transformational and can improve people's lives. So whether that's the partnership that we have with the UN High Commission on Refugees to enable money to get into the hands of Ukrainian refugees, whether it's the work we've been doing since COVID with 60,000 doctors and nurses in Venezuela that leverage USDC to get paid. Whether it's work that we do with Latin American partners such as BITSO that enables folks who are living in countries that are either suffering from political or financial turmoil to access dollars in a very easy, inexpensive, convenient way. These are the types of stories that we're telling, and that plus the trust that sort of is this. There's this groundswell that's occurring, so it's incredibly exciting. Tell us about some utility use cases, et cetera, with NEAR. Like what's real world applications? What's that all about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and maybe to put things in context, so on NEAR, what we see today is over 22 million wallets that have been created and being used. We have over 1,100 projects because it's permissionless, so anyone anywhere can actually decide to start building a project. And we have 1 million monthly active users. So this is to give an idea of like the size of what we're talking about. But to get into some of the concrete use cases, one that, I mean, biased, but I really like a lot because it shows this transition Web 2 to Web 3. It's an app that's called Sweatcoin. And so with Sweat, you can install that on your phone. They have actually 150 million users worldwide. You install it on your phone and then you get points for walking. And so the ethos of that is actually, let's get people healthier, because actually if you move and if you walk, then you're healthier and therefore you're fit. And Sweat is now an app that actually is built on NEAR as an underlying protocol. And therefore, not only do you just earn and own like Web 2 tokens with which you can't do much, but now you actually have a token that is a Sweat token that you can start moving actually within the economy of Sweat, but also within the NEAR economy and within the USDC economy and so on and so forth. When we did what we call the airdrop, which is like the go live actually of Sweat on NEAR, that was the largest actually airdrop and the first start of a Web 2 company getting onto Web 3. So that's one actually real life use case. You mentioned Ukraine. I think it's actually really important. A lot of our original and founders team actually come from Ukraine. And so when the war hit, I mean, needless to say that we were emotionally, of course, hit very hard, but also like in terms of, you know, teams and talent, like that was our largest hub. That's where we had actually most of our developers. But the community rallied and actually created a DAO and was able in less than 72 hours to basically from scratch create an ONG. Amazing. And that was extremely powerful. not only to distribute money, but actually also to rethink the whole supply chain. Because very often, in particular, when we think of like, relief into areas, it's also about, yes, getting money into the hands of people, but also like tracking goods and tracking what's happening and so on and so forth, right? So that's another example, which is completely different. Taking another tack again, because I mean, we said that earlier, but I could go on forever about real use cases. But another one is, as a layer one, we've always from the start believed in sustainability. So we are actually proof of stake. We've been audited from day one by actually a foundation, which is called the North Pole, which is in Zurich, and they help us track our carbon footprint year in, year out. And by the way, the biggest culprit of our carbon footprint is humans. It's us when we travel to conferences. That's the thing that actually is the carbon footprint of the NEAR economy. But because we are that, we actually see a flurry of projects that come on and want to build on NEAR because of this sustainable angle. And for example, we have a project called Open Forest Protocol. They're actually one of the first companies that is really able to trace the emission of carbon credit. There's actually a lot going on in the world in terms of like, carbon credit markets. Okay, yeah, that's great. We definitely need more transparency on that. But we also need more transparency on like the emission of that. And so the idea is if you plant a tree somewhere, you can actually have full traceability of the growth of that tree. And therefore you can track the emission of carbon credit that happened, right? So that's another example of the type of things we see. Loyalty and actually enabling, rethinking ticketing, rethinking ownership are also things we see. We partner with SailGP. It's actually a sailing competition that was created by the founder also of Oracle. The idea is, what if we took Formula One, forget about actually the damage that it can do on sustainability, and bring that on water and do it fully sustainable and have a sailing competition. That's what SailGP is about. We partner with SailGP. There is a DAO that has been actually launched to do the ownership of a team. And so that's the first time in actually sports history that you can now have a DAO who owns fully a sports team and a professional sports team. Ticketing is being reinvented. I mean, I'm telling you, I could go on and on for mainstream use cases.
So I think one of the themes you just touched on, though, is it's as important for you as it is for us to be transparent about how you operate and how you function, and that then builds trust so that people want to be able to interact with NEAR. Let's talk a little bit about the importance of having some sort of digital asset of value on NEAR, such as USDC, and where you would see the use cases for that. I mean, I think it's quite obvious, but I think we should have a little chat about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you nailed it, right? It's actually a lot is about trust, but also a lot is about stability. Yeah. And so when you think of ecosystems and community, it's all very good, but actually the NEAR token is used to participate in the NEAR network, but it's not necessarily used to actually, own goods or go back to a standard of like, what's the value into that. And so thinking of, partnering with stable coins and having USDC fully native on NEAR, which we announced at NearCon last year, and which is being fully developed and finalized, but that's actually really important, right? Because then it helps a whole economy actually function and have that token. Yep. Of unit. Yeah. But I'm curious, I mean, you talked a lot about like the use cases and the mainstream adoption that you're seeing, and a lot of that is fantastic to see, in particular in emerging countries. If we take a different tack, like what do you think are some of the blockers that we're seeing for mainstream adoption?
Yeah, I think for us, one of the biggest blockers is just lack of clear regulation. You've heard a number of the speakers today talk about this. You heard Jeremy talk about it this morning. I think the sooner we can get clearer regulation, then that will unlock doors. A lot of what we've seen just in the past few weeks in a regulated industry that we ironically had to protect USDC from and Eurocoin from was the banks, which is a heavily regulated industry, of course. But in our industry, we are not, the regulation is not clear, and that then creates a cloudier ability it makes it harder for mainstream institutions and so forth to know kind of how to work with companies like yours, with ours, et cetera. So I think that is absolutely it has to happen. In the meantime, though, there's just a ton of promise, which suggests that the regulation will come in a much clearer way than it exists today. And then we'll actually have the ability to unlock all these use cases in an even bigger way than we already are, for literally helping humans, whether it's humanitarian use cases, whether it's businesses, whether it's cross-border remittances, whether it's companies that are trying to have a more streamlined way of paying for supply chain, whether it's someone paying their employees that perhaps or their contributors, their suppliers, whoever it might be in other jurisdictions where money it just does not flow. It just gets clogged time and time again. It costs too much money to get money from A to B. And all of that will get unleashed in a much more dramatic way. What are the blockers for you? I mean, you come at this from a slightly different angle than USDC, obviously, but for a chain like NEAR.
Yeah, well, I think definitely regulation is one, right? Because with regulation goes talent. And so at least the angle we see on regulation, lack of clarity on regulation means that talent moves, right? You move your corporate headquarters, you move where you can actually bank. So not having that also means that, as you said, like partners, how can they partner with you? What does it mean? And so on and so forth. So I think that's definitely one. The other one that we see is usability. So I think, in blockchain and in the entire ecosystem, one, we've been using a ton of jargon, and we should just, get rid of that, because if you want to be truly usable and become mainstream, you actually need to have openness to diversity and inclusion and more talent coming in and building all of that. And one key factor of that is actually de-jargonizing, right? So that's definitely is a blocker. Usability and UX, I think, still definitely need to be improved a lot and worked on. And that's where I'm hopeful, because in where we are right now in the market, we see an influx of talent actually coming in, which is thinking through like more Web2 mindsets. How do we use that? What is good? What does good look like actually from a usability perspective? Usability in our world also often means like, having real use cases that end users can go on, and they don't need to know what it is, right? They don't need to know which blockchain it's built on. They don't need to know which technology it's built on, but it needs to do something that's truly, benefiting them. So I think that's really important. And usability is also for developers, right? There is, when we think of Rust and Solidity, which are two of the common languages known for building on blockchain, that's only 100,000 couple of developers who can actually build on that. That's not opening up things to become mainstream. So what we've done at NEAR, we've built a JavaScript SDK, because JavaScript is actually millions of developers who can participate, right? And so I think those barriers need to be continuously broken down so that ultimately we stop having to explain what's a layer 1 and what's a layer 2 and so on and so forth. The evolution we've made with NEAR in moving from being a layer 1 to being a blockchain operating system is also bringing that up a level, because the other thing is also like there's so many different systems that it needs to be all interoperable, right? And so who becomes that interoperability layer, whether it's actually on the front end or on the back end? And so that's what we're doing. So we're very, as you said, coming at it slightly differently, because technologists and builders, but usability is absolutely fundamental, and thinking through that and continuously improving that and having the talent that comes in the ecosystem to help build that.
I think that's a common theme for us as well. We have particularly since last year, we have a pretty major push into developer communities around the world. And we've seen very strong correlation, obviously, between developers having this be a developer-driven technology, where developers are learning how to develop with USDC, with our open protocols, et cetera. Then the number of wallets that we see a direct correlation with wallet growth, and people actually using USDC and holding it and keeping it and putting it in wallets that they can trade it and exchange it, et cetera. So tell me a bit about NEAR's kind of global footprint. One thing we share in common is that we're both 24/7, 365 companies. That's just the reality of being in this space. And how does that sort of influence and impact what you guys are working on a daily basis, just in terms of the global remit that you have? We certainly have a global remit. We know that there's insatiable desire to have dollars, particularly in emerging economies where there's political turmoil, financial turmoil, et cetera. And we know that we can satisfy that demand because of the nature and the sort of the way in which USDC works and the way it's been established. And our remit as a company is a global one. We try to have the company itself reflect the very population that we're serving, which is a global population. We're a globally distributed company. We have very active pillars that we focus on based on, for example, developer communities around the world, business adoption around the world, et cetera, humanitarian needs globally. How does that play into NEAR's vision?
Yeah, well, a lot actually. And so we do have a lot of grassroots communities that can pick up basically from anywhere, right? Because again, like a layer 1 protocol as NEAR is permissionless. So anyone, anywhere can get excited by it and start building. But more than that, we actually encourage that because our true belief is actually diversity and inclusion matter, but on all different dimensions. And ultimately, a lot of us think that, speaking English is de facto, but it's not. And you still have a tons of community out there that actually don't speak English because it's still a privilege. And so we've seen tremendous growth from like nowhere in Vietnam, for example. So we have a fantastic community that's born completely from the ground up in Vietnam. We do have grassroots communities also, for example, in Kenya and in Nigeria and all over Africa. Actually, we have more and more of this grassroots community. Asia is extremely interesting. Korea, different take, but Korea is a gaming market. We also see like a lot of that happening because gaming very often has been a trigger for innovation in web. And Korea is actually very innovative in gaming. So if you ponder those two things upon, then you have a new community that's, looking different from like a Vietnam community or from other communities. But same as you, 24/7, very global. It's, NEAR is also, it's not a company. It's like, it's a decentralized network. So the part I look after is the foundation, but then there is just 1,100 different projects and there's just millions participants in the ecosystem that are, wherever they want to be. And I think that's the beauty of seeing, what can be enabled with that technology. And the other thing, building back on what you were saying, it's also then the importance and the reach that something like USDC on a network like that can have, right? Because ultimately, people also go back to like, what's the stable notion that we can have within that ecosystem, right? And maybe, we talked about blockers and we talked about mainstream. What about your hope for the future and for 2023? What does it look like?
What a nice way to wrap the session. Yeah, absolutely. I think, if we can keep doing more of what we're already doing today, with whether it's with commercial partners who, as I said, are working to whether it's paying suppliers, whether it's paying vendors, whoever it might be, whether it's pay-ins, payouts, et cetera, in a fast, seamless, easy, inexpensive way in which USDC fundamentally operates. But I think that what really pulls at my heartstrings are that while we do that, we can also make a significant difference to make people's lives better. And so these use cases that we're seeing right now where USDC is able to get to places where a normal old dollar can't. A normal old dollar that's running on 1970s payment rails just cannot do it. And when you think about the power of that as these opportunities grow, and unfortunately, there's always going to be a crisis around the corner, some sort of humanitarian crisis around the corner. And the more of these use cases that are proven and shown, I think this is where we'll also we can really feel, it's one thing to enable businesses. It's another thing to enable people and humans to actually have a better life and get access to very much needed finances at a time when they're desperate. And those types of use cases are probably the ones that really motivate. They certainly motivate me. They certainly motivate an awful lot of us, and we can do just more of that. And so that's probably the most exciting aspect of the path we're on right now. And for you guys?
Yeah, for us, so when I look out the window, I'm like, the world is in turmoil, right?
Yeah.
You just need to be in the streets to see the number of bins that are out there and just like the chaos that fills around all of us. And you mentioned crisis. I think as an industry, we've had a fair amount of crises that we have to deal through. But not only that, some of those crises are also touching the real regulated world and therefore are having an impact there. What motivates us is that at NEAR, we have the luxury to be able to think very long term. And that's how we think, right? We think ultimately the technology is there. It can actually reinvent a lot of business cases, and we can actually think long term on how we do that. thinking long term also means we have the opportunity to think sustainably. And I don't mean, of course, I mean like thinking sustainably from, you know, an energy consumption perspective and what that means, but I also mean sustainably from reinventing business cases and business models that are more sustainable, more user-centric, and actually can enable more things for the future going forward. You know, NEAR was built actually in the last bear market at the bottom in 2018 because there was a need and there was a problem to solve. I think right now, with so many problems around us, there is actually not a lack of, you know, finding solutions to help solve that. And when I look at the technology that, you know, collectively we have in our hands, I think there's a lot of really good things that can happen. And maybe, you know, the last thing that gives me hope is also the amount of super strong talents that we're seeing come in, you know, Web 2 to Web 3, and just the level up of that entire industry. We've seen that, you know, over the last 7 or whatever years that we've been in that industry, but now it's at a totally different ball game, right? So there is more that has been built, there is more cases, there is more talent coming through, and so we all have the opportunity, especially here, to think long term, and I think we can make a real impact.
We're also getting more diversity. I mean, there's 2 women on the stage. When does that happen in the blockchain world?
Yeah. Is that diverse?
Anyway, awesome. Well, thank you a ton. Thank you so much, Marieke. And we'll who's up next? Over to you, Julian.
Perfect. Thank you.